A quick introduction. I am Vijay, CEO of Applied AI Consulting, and with me I have Gigi Kunanan Nagarkar, who is the CTO and architect. So the today's web topic is journey to containers and serverless. Uh, Setting this expectation, which those who are attending it have attended earlier webinar, there's a similar expectation. This is we are trying to share our experience of application modernization journey with multiple customers we have worked with, across size and complexity. We'll talk about our learnings, failures, and challenges. We will, talk about the best practices. We believe that you understand what is containers, what is app modernization, and serverless. So we'll not get into that unless there's any specific question. We'll be, happy to answer that at any point in time in between the webinar or at the end of the webinar. We have 45 minutes scheduled. We'll be talking for 30 minutes or lesser, and we'll have ample time to ask any questions in between or after. What I expect at the end of this webinar as a takeaway, one is the readiness framework, app modernization readiness framework that we are using from AWS. We'll share that PDF with you that we have been using with our customers, planning out the modernization journey. Then, the success story that we'll talk about, or rather the implementation story that we'll talk about across the platform and refactor. There will be takeaways from the learnings and mistakes that we have done. And also there is one success story that I'm going to talk about where we decided not to go ahead with containerization. What was the thought process and why did you take that decision? That may be a takeaway at the end of the webinar. So this itself is a very huge topic, application modernization journey. I mean, and to do justice to this 30-minute, we have broken into three parts. Part one is evaluating modernization readiness for application. And generally what we call is a planning stage, where we tend to spend more than 30 to 40% of our time running through, different business versus tech mapping, running through the tech capabilities of the application, and then putting the entire plan. I'll not get into a lot of it because this will get boring and a lot of theory, but I'll touch upon this in a slide. In the next slide, I'll touch upon this. The key thing in the modernization readiness for application evaluation process is identifying the need for modernization, developing a modernization strategy, and then conducting a thorough assessment. So I'll touch upon it. We'll be spending a lot of time, basically more than 20 minutes, talking about building modern application for resiliency and observability, where we'll talk about implementing the modernization plan, testing and quality assurance, DevOps, observability, resilience. We'll touch upon all this topic, and which is the main agenda for today. In the next webinar, I believe is scheduled for 9 Jan, and you'll soon see the invite, will be around event-driven architecture, building the modern apps, where we'll talk about serverless first approach, event-driven architecture, and we'll talk about a couple of recent work that we have done and the challenges that we faced. So on the evaluation, how do we evaluate for the application modernization readiness? Very simple, X and Y axis, easy to understand. It's against business and financial versus technology and operational. And wherever we see that there's a lot of business value, but technology and operations have room for improvement. They are on the they need to change. They are not operational. They're not scalable, performant, secure, whatnot. That becomes a candidate for modernize and replace. So that's any very 10,000 feet level approach. Wherever there is good business and financial value, and there's a good technology in operations. I mean, you are already containerized, you are running good. I mean, there may not be need to go serverless. You can just maintain and expand it bit by bit. So this is the first cut approach we take, and then we start bucketing the application. So when we work with a customer, for example, we were working with a customer which is into uh, document processing and invoice account payable processing, and also into workflow automation. Big company did some acquisitions, have grown big. They had a monolith app, and we had to decide. Uh, so we started working with them on the readiness assessment. So we audited all their existing applications, compiled architectures and application integration mapping, and then came up with a roadmap. We bucketed them into these four buckets, and then the next story when we'll talk about where we help, did the refactoring approach for them, and why did we choose certain application for the modernization and replacement. These are the several business focused questions that we should consider. What are the businesses need now, and which problems are we trying to solve as an organization and as a department? What capabilities does the business need to add in order to grow? What does the business need to do better to support customers? And in our next example, we'll talk about the fourth point, which was this critical driver to help us take the modernization decision, refactoring decision. We have been using this AWS prescriptive guidance for evaluating modernization readiness for application. So this is a readiness assessment process where we talk to these stakeholders in the organization and then conduct one-on-one interview. We talk to them. We start gathering a lot of information, strategic, functional, technical, financial, and readiness related. And then at the end of the day, we present a entire stuff. And then there are a lot of details out here to read here. The kind of questions, revalidation, factor decision, and all. So a very big document, very comprehensive. This has been really, really helpful to us when we have taken this to our customers and put the entire mapping and then decided on the modernization scope. So we'll share this across the PDF with all of you. So this may be useful if there's anything else that you are using, and if you want to share that with us, we'll be more than happy to hear and then use that also or update this document. So with this, I'll pause on the rationalization and modernization evaluation process. I'll jump on to implementations directly because that's where we would like to spend more time. So let's talk about now building modern application for resiliency and observability. So evaluation is done, we have decided that here now there are 2 or 3 applications that has to get started for modernization. Then we have 3 paths to choose from: rehost, replatform, refactor. So, and everyone in this call knows the definitions. I'll not read them. But when we decide on either of these 3 paths, then the real work starts. So this is our first customer story that we are going to talk about today, where we took the refactor decision. Let me talk about this customer, and then I'll pass the ball to Gigi to get into more technical aspect of it, and then talk about challenges and the overall implementation journey. Generally, when I was putting this, deck, I looked at this report, State of Application Modernization Report 2022, and it said that companies intend to refactor 17% of their custom legacy applications as a part of modernization initiative. So sometimes we feel like, right, that we have to modernize all our applications, but that's not true. Just a handful of applications go through modernization initiative, and it's a continuous process, it's a journey. And then every time, based on the business, financial versus technical and operational metrics, the new applications are getting added. Or whenever we are thinking of a new application, entirely new application and not from the existing stack, then we give it an serverless or a modernized application first approach. Well, so coming to this customer, which is a large account payable processing organization, which is into business process and accounting automation. For this customer, they had 20 out of 20 plus key services modules. One of the module was custom module for each integration with an ERP for a client. So I was talking about the fourth point where while taking a business decision, the analysis was that spending a lot of time on a customer support, a lot of time into custom integrations as a part of professional services work. So the product is there. When it has to be put into customer environment, they have custom integrations with ERPs. So they, if there are 10 ERPs and hundreds of clients, that means thousands of similar code, and they have to be maintained separately. So a lot of tech debt, lot of rework, and the money was draining. This needed an army of professional services to onboard every new customer and maintain existing set of customers. So risk of breaking with upgrades, inherent. And it took close to 6 weeks to onboard any customer. This was, I mean, the reason why this was the first candidate we did a lot of other modules, modernization with separate applications, but this was the first one, and we thought let's share this story with you all. So on the business was it technically well, this stood out as a candidate for modernization, and we chose refactor as the modernization approach. And when you say refactor, it's basically rebuild your application using cloud native microservices, integrate new technologies, and deploy on a hybrid cloud platform. Here, the cloud platform for the choice was AWS. We went serverless route and created something called the integration gateway. Gigi, over to you to take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, Vijay. So yeah, so taking from there, just pointing out few of the important possible technical problems or technical uh, issues that made it an application that should be prioritized high in the modernization journey by the customer was uh, like this application or this solution is in use for maybe 15 plus years now, has multiple deployments at multiple customers, and each customer has its own version of ERP getting integrated. Those integrations are possibly even at the DB level developed by the field, the professional services organizations. So the code is not well maintained, and every time a newer version or an upgrade or some fixes needs to be released for the application, the it becomes a problem even for the professionals in the field guys to upgrade, right? Upgradability is a problem, supportability is a problem, because existing integrations needs to work. That code, the release cycle is big because those many different versions of ERPs and those many deployment needs to be verified, right? So it becomes a problem. And you might have even faced it yourself. So that's where a huge amount of time, though this application was identified for modernization, a huge amount of time, maybe 3 to 4 weeks, went in terms of even discussing and knowing the problems. Everybody who is interfacing with customers is a different person, and they relate with the problem better than anybody else. So that's why bringing those guys in and talking and asking and recording and discussing helps identify and helps justify and helps make sure that whatever you're trying to now refactor and build into uh, takes care of those problems. So that's where those issues of every other ERP, challenges of every other ERP having its own way of communicating, its own way of authenticating. Some may not have APIs, some may just do a sync mode of give me the file and I will import, sort of a thing, right? So all of that needs to be understood, and that's where it came down that okay, if we have an isolated piece, which got called as the integration gateway, an isolated piece wherein now the application can talk to the ERPs via that piece or via that gateway, but that gateway is configurable and extendable enough in terms of letting the administrator of the application create flows to talk to that specific version of the ERP via the filters and transformers. Because every other ERP, even if it is the same ERP and same version, the deployment of the ERP may end up creating different fields, right? Because the deployers are different or their needs are different, and the extendability of ERP allows you to create fields. So even if it's the same vendor, the field field at customer one could be different than at customer two. And so configurable transformer wherein an input data coming, if even if I'm trying to create a vendor on an ERP, I would be able to transfer it to different fields because that particular endpoint of the ERP expects it that way. So that made it like a separate piece in itself, which uh, which helps solve the problem of, okay, even if I'm releasing something, even if a new version of a ERP comes up, it's or there's a change in existing, I'm not changing the core product because the core product is not now tightly integrated. It's not a point to point integration with the ERP. It has to then go via a gateway, wherein I would be able to define a new transformer if I need to, and connect to that ERP, and a new ERP or a newer version of ERP. It's a simpler thing that I develop an adapter in a time period of 3 to 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks. But once it is developed, then every other deployment of the application can use and can go via the same gateway, right? Even if it is a newer deployment of the gateway, but the code base is same. So it become easy from a maintainability perspective. It became easy from a supportability, validation, testing perspective, and that helped solve the problem. And then good amount of discussion went into, should we make it a containerized or should we make it a serverless deployment. And it came out that even if we use serverless, some of the advantages of serverless could very well be beneficial, and there are cons as well in terms of start time or initiating time, and not big a problem because these actions are happening in an async background mode. So if there's a delay of few seconds, like 4 to 5 seconds or 6 seconds, it's not a big problem. So that became one of the key points of making it a lightweight, a serverless, or lightweight in terms of initial cost, like you pay only when it is getting used, sort of a thing. Uh, so lightweight in terms of that, and ease of development also made the I mean help make a decision that let's go with the serverless, and that become a easy deployment. As well, the internal tools like the API generator that we have helps build it quickly for the customer, for us. So that's the overall refactor journey. Within a matter of maybe 3 to 4 months, we were in UAT, and then with a good amount of testing, it was ready to be used at some of our customers for at least 2 adapters, and then new adapters are getting developed because it's pluggable that way.
Thanks, Gigi. So, do you want to talk about any challenges in this we faced?
Yeah, I mean, one important challenge that I mentioned was from the authorization perspective, right? Every ERP had its own way. The startup time was, and the design time and architecture discussion time was seen as a challenge, but once it was understood that it's like how many seconds and is it okay in that overall equation, then it was not big a challenge, but that was considered as a challenge at the discussions time. um, the I mean, other than that, there are some or other small things that's okay. I mean, deployment and all, but that's not a big deal. But those were two important things that came up as a challenge to start with, and um, yeah, so it was okay and acceptable, and we moved ahead with it.
Okay. So let me then move on to then another customer where we had to take a re-platform decision. Again, while I was putting the deck, I was reading the State of Application Modernization Report 2022, and it says that companies intend to re-platform 18% of their custom legacy applications as a part of the modernization initiative. So again, so if you see, right, there's a right mix. 17%, I mean, roughly goes into the refactor, 18% re-platform, a few percentage into rehost, and few discards, right? So this is how it will evolve. Now, this customer specifically, a large insurance provider, one of the largest provider in India, uh, their application, which was non-containerized, every new feature took 3 to 6 months before going to production. Creating environments manually was error-prone and time-consuming, and needed frequent updates. And what they had to do is basically this application is hosted in each of the sub broker environment. So think of, it as one big MNC insurance provider where each of the banks provide, insurance service as a broker. And this application had to be deployed in each of the bank's environment because of the RBI regulations and security reasons. Now, every time these were non-containerized, every time this entire application had to be installed, deployed in the broker environments, and they had hundreds of brokers. So those environments, and then every new feature again has to be tested, all that. So it was just, they were not moving fast. They were, and the amount of changes that is happening in the financial world and IRD and all, I mean, they were not able to keep the pace up with that. So they had to put an army of people. They had to do a lot of, juggling there. When you started talking, I mean, this was a clear case for replatforming, because if you look at that, x-axis and y-axis, business value was there because that customers, they were happy, they were functional value. On technical and operational, uh, the platform technically was correct. The challenge were into deployment, into upgrades, into, environment creation and all, which is not something that you have to fix in the application code. It is something that you have to, slight application code fixing, but more on the deployment aspect of it. That's where it was a case for containerization. And we thought, let's replatform it. Now, when we were doing it, right, so a couple of challenges that we saw here was, that since uh, each container were deploying in different broker environments, right? For example, let's take if it was, Axis Bank or ICICI Bank. So I'm just using these names for the namesake, or Bank of America or Chase. The, the containers were supposed to be deployed in those broker environments in their network, and each were allocated a specific IP through which they could talk, right? So network infrastructure should not be created as a part of infrastructure as a code. It has to be detailed to face from existing Lambda function, which has a list of IPs that has to be allocated. And
So this one was an important difference that we have seen. So we picked this primarily, possibly for one of these reasons as well, in terms of discussion and sharing the knowledge, and see if you guys have seen this. But this team had a I mean, we call DevOps as single team coming together, Dev and Ops working together, all of that, right? But still the history of silos of infrastructure management, networking, security, different teams still remains, right? In bigger organizations, it's difficult to break. So the network security team has its way of has its control in terms of network, and they have defined the network and they have deployed the network, and that's where they wanted to make sure that every other application, not just this, but every other application is using the same network. And and they could, because of the evolving of the network and because of adding more feature functionality to that network layer, they expose the network attributes or network infrastructure attributes via a Lambda function. And then this customer had picked that they wanted to work only on cloud formation and not Terraform, primarily because of, and rightly so, because of the team knowledge, right? Team had knowledge of cloud formation and stay with the knowledge instead of trying to bring in different thing. So there, now within safety, making some Lambda calls to get the network infrastructure attributes to be used for some of the other resources that were getting deployed or getting configured, was one important difference and challenge that we faced. And the thought of we could share, this is what we did. There are other better, different ways that you yourself might have tried. Please, I'm happy to hear. But this was one important thing that we faced when we were working on this. um, I mean, we spent some time talking about identifying and doing the assessment to identify the application to modernize. So you won't get into a greenfield. I mean, we also didn't get into a greenfield. Customer also has some or other thoughts because of the experience that they have. They already have some or other prioritized application in their mind, and then we get into that mode in terms of doing some semi assessment and helping substantiate that decision, right? But once it is identified, decided, then it comes down to some of these restrictions while you're doing it, right? Hey, you cannot do this, can do this sort of a thing. So some other one more important different, not like a challenge, but a different that we've seen is, I mean, primarily a lot of us have been using Terraform for infrastructure as a code than CFT because of whatever we have seen as a difference there in terms of value and all, right. And over time it has evolved, over years it has evolved substantially. But these guys, when we were deploying or doing provisioning in any case via CFT or via Terraform, it's a simple provider that is available and we could use those resources. But when it came to CFT, it's not an in-house inbuilt resource that it had at that time, and we had to use the third party. It's very well documented process, but we had to use the third party to do it, and that's what one more different thing that we had to do. Not like a challenge, different thing, but. But yeah, the whole containerization exercise help make sure that this customer gets the benefit of cloud in their modernization journey, in terms of elasticity, in terms of up and down elasticity, storage, cloud, cost, and all, right. So that's what was a good experience there. Putting, I mean, not just containerizing, but making sure that the containers are um, checked for security and any other third party vulnerability and all, right, it, as part of the whole DevOps process and modernization journey there.
Thanks, Gigi. And though we'll not cover today, in the next session we'll talk more on this. But one of the important thing here was, right, when we started taking the containerization decision, the important aspect was what should be the containers configuration, because I mean you cannot keep it beefy, you don't want to keep it too CPU, compute too small. So the important aspect before containerization is making sure that your application is tested for performance, the kind of scale that you are imagining. Now we are talking about the consumer facing application. So if the scale is required for say 100,000 users at any point of time, then application has to be tested so that you are not just spinning up spots like anything containers. So we used the AI test to perform those performance testing on the application, which gave us a very good guidance on what should be the CPU, what is the CPU consumption, what is the memory consumption, what's the IO consumption, and etc. And that helps us decide the optimal configuration for the containers. And then on top of that, the carpenter from AWS helps anyways to make it much more optimized as it runs in a runtime. But to start with, generally I have seen, and a lot of experience that I have seen in recent past is where, though we move to containers, we still treat that as an existing old style servers, where we still keep the configuration very beefy in case situation happens, right, that kind. But if we do a good performance testing and get the sizing numbers and then configure the containers, I think that helped here to define the right configuration. When we'll talk about the refactoring in the next webinar, we'll talk about another use case where we had to spawn up to 150 pods because the configuration was not correct. So moving on to the third one, and I know we are already close to 30 minutes done, so we'll try to wrap up in 5 minutes. This is another customer, into intelligent analytics domain used by a lot of financial institutions, and they process 10,000 million data items. Old application built with Microsoft Stack. Business goal very clear. I don't have to even read them, right? So they're very clear. This was the business goal when I was talking to the leadership team. They want to reduce the cost. Scalability was a problem because they had to process millions of records. Security, because this application was built long back, and then since these were financial institutions, they wanted auditing, they wanted more reports, security guidance, and all. Their productivity and supportability because releasing was tough. So we talked about it. We started doing evaluation. The management was, just desirous to move to containers, and we decided that we should not do that until they make some changes to the application. And reason was it was the Windows based application with a older .NET framework, So the image size was large and hence could not get the cost benefit they were imagining. Setting up the container is costly and time consuming, since in order to run a Windows container on a Windows server, the container's base OS image must match that of the host. And that was a challenge. You know, the Windows container and container instances cannot support all the task definition parameters that are available for Linux containers. So with all these reasons, we requested them to make the application level changes where they should move to the .NET Core framework and have the application deployed on Linux. If that compatibility is achieved, then I think rest is easier. So, uh, you know, these are the few thought processes that we have to share before we, really take the modernization decision. With this, I think there are three stories, we wanted to share today, summarizing, and then we'll open up the floor for any questions that, you might have. Mm, App rationalization for modernization needs to be a decision based between business and tech values. We talked about it. Refactor has its own tech challenges in terms of serverless startup time. AWS Reinvent 22 announced Lambda Snap Start. I love this, which makes the startup up to 10x faster for the Java applications also. So Java-based serverless code. So I think this is an important announcement, and that may the challenge that we faced, it may make it better. Replatforming needs to make sure that the underlying application tech stack supports containerization. If not, that's the first immediate step to do. And then lastly, app modernization is a journey. We need to keep looking for incremental modernization rather than boiling the ocean and risking the business and customer engagement. And that's what we have been doing with all our customers. We have been looking for an opportunity where, for one of the customer, we, re-platform from, one product to AWS batch services, and also, I mean, multiple stories, but, it's continuous journey and it has to continue evolve. With this, I think I'm done. Gigi, want to add anything? If not, I think we're good.
Yeah, I think we could, unless there are questions. I mean, some more things that I have experienced or seen is many of the customers do not pick the complete application for modernization. A part of the application or a module of the application which is separated enough is even picked for modernization, be it like a microservice, right? If it is exposed, it has its own database, then the application, then only that piece is moved out, and that piece is redeveloped or refactored depending on the decisions there, and then that is modernized and used in a modular way, right? So that is also one experience that I've seen. As simple as, so we're working with this customer where there is a incoming email, and the incoming email needs to be looked at, and some entities needs to be identified um, to help them make a decision, right? They are a investment bank CRM, so they're now the existing application is whatever is the tech stack, but this module which they are looking at could very well be redeveloped or developed in a completely newer tech stack, containerized or serverless. But that's what discussions are going towards, and that's the application that is that piece of the puzzle in the whole solution is getting developed into a serverless tech stack, right? So some of those things are also happening. That what we see, a combination of smaller pieces getting developed or redeveloped or refactored into the modernization journey for the customer.
So I think we are good. Thank you very much for your time today.